Welcome to Module 4, Developing a GCF Project. In this module, we will look closer at how to develop a GCF project. Starting from the GCF Investment Framework, Guidelines, and GCF Result Frameworks. We will also review the information you need for a GCF concept note and proposal. And conclude the module with the GCF project approval process. Let's get started. GCF commits to financing projects and programs likely to significantly shift towards low-carbon and climate-resilient development, adhering to its established results management frameworks, result areas, and decisions. It emphasizes a country-driven approach and seeks to partner with accredited entities to draw co-investors like the private sector, climate funds, and development banks to its projects. The GCF does not mandate a minimum co-financing amount or specific co-financing sources for its activities. The fund measures its extended financing in grant equivalent terms using a standard methodology aligned with international best practices, allowing for consistent comparison across different financial instruments. GCF funding aims to be as concessional as necessary, potentially covering up to the full cost of a project or program to ensure viability, with concessional defined as offering below-market terms. GCF-financed intermediaries can blend the fund's resources with their own to enhance the concessionality of financing provided to projects and programs. The fund is also careful not to displace other public or private funding sources. Lastly, GCF supports only financially viable revenue-generating activities through loans. GCF investment targets are set in line with its longer-term vision and programming priorities, and it works through overarching funding windows and dedicated structures. GCF will strive to achieve the targeted results for 2024 to 2027 with the following investment targets for the second replenishment programming period. For readiness and preparatory support, GCF aims to secure predictable resourcing for readiness and preparatory activities associated with GCF programming. GCF aims to maintain a 50-50 balance for the mitigation and adaptation portfolio over time, seeking to meet or exceed portfolio-level mitigation and adaptation results at the end of the first replenishment period. For adaptation, GCF aims to allocate at least 50% of the resources to vulnerable countries, including the least developed countries, small island developing states, and African states, considering their urgent and immediate needs. It also aims to meet or exceed the first replenishment period outcomes. The board will aim for an appropriate geographical balance. For private sector, GCF aims to increase in nominal terms the share of funding allocated through the private sector facility compared to the first replenishment period. GCF has established investment guidelines to inform the design and selection of its funding proposals. These guidelines ensure that GCF investments are strategic, impactful, and aligned with the fund's objectives to support countries' efforts towards achieving low-emission and climate-resilient development pathways. Key elements of the GCF's investment guidelines are composed of the 6 criteria and 24 coverage areas. The 6 criteria are impact potential, paradigm shift potential, sustainable development potential, recipient needs, country ownership, and efficiency and effectiveness. This table shows the coverage areas for impact potential, paradigm shift potential, and sustainable development. These are the coverage areas of the remaining criteria of needs of the recipient, country ownership, and efficiency and effectiveness. To provide more detailed information, we have included the GCF Investment Framework document and the Initial Investment Framework with activity-specific sub-criteria and indicative assessment factors document in the additional resource section of this module. GCF seeks to have an impact within 8 mitigation and adaptation result areas. The fund is also committed to achieving a balance between funding for mitigation and adaptation initiatives. GCF strives to ensure that its investments drive a paradigm shift towards low emissions and climate resilience. It considers mitigation and adaptation critical parts of the response to climate change, with all 8 result areas holding important potential. GCF seeks the sweet spots between national priorities, the potential to deliver concrete climate benefits, cost considerations, and opportunities to deliver co-benefits. The 8 result areas cover mitigation and adaptation and provide the reference points that will guide GCF and its stakeholders to ensure a strategic approach when developing programs and projects while respecting the needs and priorities of individual countries. The result areas have been targeted because of their potential to impact mitigation and adaptation substantially. Under mitigation, aiming to reduce or limit greenhouse gas or GHG emissions. GCF's strategic result areas in mitigation include energy access and power generation, support for increased access to clean, reliable, and sustainable energy sources, low-emission transport, investment in sustainable and low-emission transport systems, buildings, cities, industries, and appliances, enhancing energy efficiency and promoting the use of low-emission technologies in urban environments and industries, forests and land use, encouraging sustainable forest management and land use practices that contribute to carbon sequestration and reduce deforestation. 4. Adaptation. With a focus on increasing resilience to the impacts of climate change, the strategic result areas for adaptation are health, food, and water security. Initiatives that ensure stability and safety in food supply, water availability, and health outcomes in the face of climate risks. Livelihoods of people and communities. Projects aimed at improving the resilience of people's livelihoods, especially in vulnerable communities. Infrastructure and built environment. Enhancing infrastructure resilience and the built environment to withstand climate-related stresses and disasters. Ecosystems and ecosystem services. Protecting and restoring ecosystems to reinforce their natural resilience and the services they provide in support of human communities. GCF is committed to ensuring that our activities complement other funds and that we have a coherent approach to supporting developing countries' climate ambitions. GCF works with the Adaptation Fund, the Climate Investment Funds, and the Global Environment Facility to maximize the impact of their activities. GCF supports the Great Green Wall Initiative, launched in 2007 by the African Union. This initiative targets the climate-vulnerable Sahel region, stretching from Senegal to Sudan. The region faces severe droughts, floods, desertification, and livelihood threats, with temperatures rising rapidly. Initially conceived as a 15 kilometers wide strip of vegetation, the project has expanded into an ambitious effort to restore 100 million hectares of land, combat desertification, and address climate and development challenges across the Sahel. The Amazon basin is a top priority for GCF because it is the world's largest tropical forest and has significant carbon storage capacity. The Amazon is valuable not only for its mitigation potential through reduced emissions but also for its adaptation capabilities and numerous co-benefits. These include biodiversity conservation with over 3 million species, water security with 20% of the world's flowing freshwater, and sustaining the livelihoods of millions of people. Additionally, the Amazon is home to various indigenous and traditional cultures that view the forest as spiritually invaluable. Mitigation and adaptation efforts aim to protect these communities, enhance their well-being, and bolster their centuries-old sustainable relationship with the environment. GCF is committed to mobilizing resources, forging partnerships, and harnessing innovation to ensure that every person on Earth is protected by early warning systems within 5 years, supporting the UN Secretary-General's Early Warnings for All initiative, launched in 2022. GCF has invested nearly $933 million in early warning projects, including 77 projects with 42 in least developed countries and 35 in small island developing states. The GCF project or program activity cycle, as approved by the board, consists of the following key stages. 1. Country and accredited entity work programs. 2. Targeted generation of projects/programs. 3. Concept note submission. 4. Funding proposal development. 5. Funding proposal review by Secretariat and Independent Technical Advisory Panel. 6. Board consideration. 7. Legal arrangements and post-approval. In addition, the following stages are related to the portfolio management and implementation of GCF-approved projects. 8. Monitoring for performance and compliance. 9. Adaptive management, and 10. Evaluation, learning, and project closure. This module will focus on the concept note development and the funding proposal development. The concept note is an initial document submitted to the GCF detailing a prospective project or program to seek early feedback from the Secretariat on its compatibility with GCF's objectives and criteria. This assists in refining the project or program idea. Before the concept note submission, and certainly by the time of the full funding proposal, the accredited entity is required to A. Inform the NDA or the focal point about the proposed activity, ensuring it matches the country's strategic goals and priorities. B. Notify the GCF Secretariat about the initiation of these consultations. Note that the Secretariat's feedback doesn't imply approval or a promise of funding. Final funding decisions rest with the GCF board, based on various technical, financial, and environmental considerations. Proposals are considered by the board only if the Independent Technical Advisory Panel and the Secretariat recommend them. Let's walk through each section of a GCF concept note. Please always refer to the latest concept note template on the GCF website. Here is the GCF concept note template. We will go through the template page by page. Here is the cover page of the concept note covering the basic information about the proposed project or program. You will need to fill out all the fields here. Project/program title, provide the full title of the proposed project/program. Country, enter the country, or countries, where the proposed project/program will be implemented. National Designated Authority, insert the name of the NDA or the focal point as a national-level interface with GCF. Accredited Entity, insert the name of the entity accredited by GCF's board. Date of first submission, insert date of the first submission of the concept note to GCF. Date of current submission/version number, insert the date of the current submission of the concept note to the GCF, followed by the version number, which pertains to the number of times the concept note has been submitted to the GCF. Project or Program Summary is Section A of the concept note, which intends to obtain essential information about the proposed project or program. Here are the fields in the template. 1. Project or Program, check the appropriate box indicating whether the proposal is associated with a project or a program. If the proposal refers to a combination of multiple projects, it is considered a program. 2. Public or private sector, indicate whether the proposal is associated with an organization from the public or private sectors. 3. Is the concept note submitted in response to a request for proposals? Indicate whether the proposal was submitted in response to an RFP. If the answer is yes, write the specific RFP to which the proposal is responding, such as micro, small, medium-sized enterprises pilot program. 4. Confidentiality, indicate whether the proposal should be kept confidential. Concept notes not marked as confidential will be published in accordance with the GCF's information disclosure policy and review of the initial proposal approval process. 5. Indicate the result areas for the project or program. Mark the result areas that apply to the proposed project/program. As shown in the checklist, there are 8 result areas, 4 mitigation and 4 adaptation. In some cases, proposed projects or programs may bring multiple co-benefits and several result areas. For example, efforts to invest in climate-compatible cities may deliver impacts related to emission reductions from low-emission transport and buildings, cities, industries, and appliances. They may also support adaptation, particularly by helping to strengthen the resilience of the livelihoods of urban people and communities and to increase the resilience of urban infrastructure. In this case, a total of 4 boxes can be ticked. If the proposal aims to bring mitigation and adaptation result areas, it is considered a cross-cutting project or program. Refer to the GCF's performance measurement frameworks for more detail. 6. Estimated mitigation impact. Provide an estimate of total tons of CO2 equivalent to be avoided or reduced annually. Refer to the GCF investment framework on how to calculate or measure this. The methodology for measuring the mitigation benefits should be mentioned in the concept note and elaborated further in the funding proposal. 7. Estimated adaptation impact. Provide the expected total number of direct and indirect beneficiaries and the number of beneficiaries relative to the total population. 8. Indicative total project cost. Specify the estimated total project cost that will cover all expenses for the successful implementation of the project, including funding from the GCF and funding that will be co-financed. 9. Indicative GCF funding request. Specify the estimated funding to be requested from the GCF. 10. Type of financial instrument requested for GCF funding. Check the appropriate box to indicate which type of financial instrument is requested from the GCF. The financial instruments are grants, reimbursable grants, subordinated loans, senior loans, equity, and guarantees. The proposal may not be limited to one type of financial instrument. 11. Estimated duration of project/program. Indicate the expected duration of the disbursement period and the repayment period for the project or program. 12. Estimated project or program lifespan. Indicate the expected lifespan of the proposed project or program in years. This refers to the total period the investment, either infrastructures or benefits, is effective. 13. Is funding from the project preparation facility requested? Stipulate whether the project intends to get the support of the GCF's PPF project preparation. See here for more information on the PPF. Also, other institutions from which financial support was received for project preparation should be enumerated. 14. Environmental and Social Safeguards, or ESS category. Select the project/program's ESS category. For more detailed information, refer to the GCF's Interim Environmental and Social Safeguards. 15. Is the concept note aligned with your accreditation standard? Indicate whether the concept note is aligned to the AE accreditation standard based on the total project size category in million US. Micro with funding of less than $10 million, small with funding between $10 and $50 million, medium with funding between $2 and $250 million, and large with funding of more than $250 million. Funding requested for the project/program must not exceed the limit of the AE standard. 16. Has the concept note been shared with the NDA? Specify whether the concept note has been shared with the NDA based on the location of the project or program. 17. Accreditation Master Agreement, or AMA, signed. If an AE submits the concept note, indicate whether the AMA has already been signed. If not, specify the status of AMA negotiations and the expected date of signing. 18. Is the concept note included in the entity work program? If an AE submits the concept note, specify whether the program or project is included in their entity work program. The entity work program is developed in collaboration with the Country Programming Division of the GCF. It is expected that projects or programs submitted by AEs are aligned with their entity work programs. 19. Project or program rationale, objectives, and approach. Brief summary of the problem statement and climate rationale, objective, and selected implementation approach, including executing entity, IES, and other implementing partners. For Section B1, Context and Baseline. You need to outline the climate challenges, GHG emission profiles, and the mitigation and adaptation that need to be targeted by the intervention. Please confirm how the project aligns with and supports the country's climate commitments, including its INDC or NDC and other climate action plans like NAMAs and NAPs. Detail the specific national priorities the project aims to address. Identify and explain the primary underlying issues and obstacles: social, gender, economic, regulatory, technological, financial, ecological, and institutional factors. For private sector initiatives, detail the distinctive features and market dynamics of the sector where the project will be implemented. For Section B2, Project or Program Description. This is where you detail the main components and activities planned to overcome identified barriers and achieve desired outcomes. You need to explain how the project's theory of change promotes a transition towards lower emissions and increased climate resilience, aligning with the fund's targets. Please ensure the project's activities comply with the country's existing regulatory and legal frameworks. Please clarify the strengths of the AE in carrying out the project, the execution arrangements with partners, and the roles of implementing entities in this section. Summarize the principal financial and operational risks and the mitigation strategies at this point in the planning. For Section B3, expected project results aligned with the GCF criteria. This is where you outline the projected impacts in line with GCF criteria, including potential effects, paradigm advancement, sustainability, recipient needs, national stakeholder engagement, and cost-effectiveness. For Section B4, engagement among the DNA, AE, and/or other relevant stakeholders in the country. This is where you detail the collaboration between the NDA, AE, and other key country stakeholders and outline the planned continued engagement as the project concept evolves into a funding proposal. This section provides an overview of the financing and cost information for the requested GCF and co-financing amounts. The GCF uses 6 financial instruments: grants, reimbursable grants, senior loans, subordinate loans, guarantees, and equity investments. Provide a breakdown of estimated costs according to the financing instrument and specify co-financing information. Financing by components, provide an estimate of the total cost per component and disaggregate the source of financing. The indicative total cost should be the sum of the GCF financing amount and the co-financing amount. On the GCF financing, provide a breakdown by component and financial instrument. For each financing instrument, specify the amount. If you select senior loans and/or subordinated loans, please specify tenor in years and pricing in percentage. In the co-financing section, specify the financial instrument, the amount of currency, and the names of institutions supporting the proposed project or program. Justification of GCF funding request. Explain why the project or program requires GCF funding, i.e., why this is not financed by the country's public and/or private sectors. Describe alternative funding options for the same activities proposed in the concept note, including analyzing the barriers to accessing finance for the potential beneficiaries and the constraints of public and private funding sources. Justify the rationale of the GCF financial instruments and how this will be passed on to the end users and beneficiaries. Describe in detail the mechanisms that will make this happen. Justify why this is the minimum required to make the investment viable and most efficient, considering the incremental cost or risk premium of the project/program. The justification for grants and reimbursable grants is mandatory. In the case of private sector proposals, concessional terms should be minimized and justified as per the guiding principles applicable to private sector operations. The concept note should include strong economic and financial justification for the grant elements and concessionality level that GCF provides. Sustainability and replicability of the project. Explain how the project/program sustainability will be ensured in the long run. Describe how this will be monitored after the project/program is implemented with support from the GCF and other sources. For example, briefly explain how the proposed activities will be continued after the grant has been fully disbursed. For non-grant instruments, explain how the capital invested will be repaid and over what duration of time. The monitoring procedures should comply with GCF requirements. The concept note should describe, to the extent possible, how it will address all the guiding principles listed below. Grant elements should be tailored to the incremental cost or risk premium required to make the investment viable or to cover specific activities, such as technical assistance, that cannot be financed otherwise. Seeking the right level of concessionality so as not to displace investments that would otherwise have occurred, including for private sector investment, and avoid crowding out commercial financing. Levels of indebtedness capacity of the recipient should be taken into account so as not to encourage excessive indebtedness. Structure terms on a case-by-case basis to address specific barriers. Leveraging other financing, seeking to maximize potential leverage in the case of private financing. The grant element of concessional finance will be tailored to provide the appropriate incentive to facilitate the implementation of mitigation and adaptation activities. Continuing from the previous slide, here are more guiding principles. Concessional forms of finance will be designed to minimize market distortions and potential disincentives to private investment. The expertise and capacity of financial intermediaries and implementing entities in implementing similar projects successfully. The risk sharing between public and private investment, when relevant. The subsidy element provided through grants and/or concessional lending will be the minimum amount necessary to make the project or program viable and help achieve the GCF's paradigm shift objective. The proposed financial structure, funding amount, financial instrument, tenor, and term is adequate and reasonable to achieve the proposal's objectives, including addressing existing bottlenecks and/or barriers. Section D includes the documents that can be submitted with the concept note but are optional. These are: map indicating the location of the project/program, diagram of a theory of change economic and financial model with key assumptions and potential stress scenarios, pre-feasibility study, evaluation report of the previous project, results of environmental and social risk screening. The GCF Concept Note User Guide is included in the additional resource section of this module. Kindly note that the feedback provided by the Secretariat does not represent acceptance or commitment to provide financial resources for a specific project/program. The GCF's board can only make funding decisions considering various factors, including technical, financial, environmental, social, gender, and legal aspects. The GCF Secretariat only submits to the board for its consideration those funding proposals whose approval has been recommended by both the Independent Technical Advisory Panel and the Secretariat. Any feedback is intended to provide non-binding guidance to enable the accredited entity to initiate the next phase, preparing and submitting the full funding proposal. The concept note is not mandatory but strongly encouraged to promote early feedback from the GCF Secretariat, to streamline with the project preparation facility, and to allow for a faster review process. GCF has dedicated funds to support AEs in funding proposal development, which the AEs can apply for through the GCF's Project Preparation Facility or PPF. The PPF supports all AEs, particularly direct access entities, and micro and small-size category projects, in project and program preparation. PPF support can be provided through grants and repayable grants, while equity may be considered for private sector projects. Funding proposals developed with the PPF should be submitted to the GCF board within 2 years of a PPF request's approval. Before submitting a PPF application, AEs must submit a concept note, which, if cleared by the Secretariat's Climate Investment Committee, can proceed to a PPF application. Suppose the concept note is cleared for PPF support. In that case, AEs must fill out the PPF application, which should include a list of requested activities to be funded by PPF support and expected deliverables, and be accompanied by a no-objection letter from the NDA or focal point. The additional resource section of this module provides more information on the PPF from the Project Preparation Facility Guidelines. Now, let's look at the fund proposal development process. It includes several steps that the AEs must take to ensure that submissions are complete and meet GCF requirements and policies. The GCF programming and pipeline development are guided by key policy frameworks: the Investment Framework, the Result Management Framework, and the Performance Management Framework. Funding proposals must be prepared following the considerations and requirements of those key policy frameworks. The Investment Framework is the key guiding framework informing GCF programming and investment decision-making. It is supported by the GCF investment policies and sets 6 investment criteria and related activity-specific sub-criteria indicators and assessment factors. AEs are expected to develop their funding proposals with due consideration of the GCF investment criteria and the applicable and relevant activity-specific sub-criteria and indicative assessment factors. In formulating the funding proposal, AEs are expected to respond to all 6 investment criteria, including only the applicable and relevant sub-criteria and indicative assessment factors. Not all activity-specific sub-criteria and indicative assessment factors will be applicable or relevant to every proposal. The current Results Management Framework, RMF, and Performance Measurement Frameworks, PMF, define the areas of action in which GCF seeks to invest in its approach to tracking and monitoring results. GCF invests across 8 results areas, covering 4 mitigation and 4 adaptation strategic impact areas. AEs are responsible for developing and initially appraising the funding proposal as part of their first-level due diligence. The AE should conduct all necessary and desirable due diligence on the proposed project/program that it would apply to its portfolio or when using or investing its funds or funds for which it has management or investment responsibility, according to its policies and procedures. The AE should document the conclusions and recommendations of its first-level due diligence in the funding proposal. Due diligence should cover the following aspects, including but not limited to the technical, engineering, economic, financial, risk, legal, and commercial viability of the proposed activities, compliance with GCF standards on environmental and social safeguards, fiduciary standards, and the gender policy to the extent and scope of its accreditation and with the applicable requirements under the Indigenous Peoples Policy. Climate change mitigation and/or adaptation impacts, including developmental benefits, administrative and regulatory requirements, and any business or company searches to ascertain the legal capacity, solvency, or financial health of the executing entity and other recipients/beneficiaries of the funding and the parties to the transaction set out in the relevant funding proposal. AEs thoroughly evaluate proposed projects or programs to ensure they align with GCF investment criteria and can effectively achieve climate mitigation or adaptation objectives. This appraisal assesses the proposal's technical, financial, economic, environmental, and social viability and cost-effectiveness. It typically includes site inspections, stakeholder consultations, and technical assessments. Through initial due diligence, AEs gather essential design details, encompassing environmental, social, and gender considerations, technical, economic, and financial viability, legal compliance, risk assessments, and plans for monitoring, reporting, and evaluation, along with establishing a results management framework. When entities are accredited to work with GCF, their accreditation scope specifies the types of projects and programs they can submit for funding and implementation. Based on the AE's capabilities, track record, and internal policies and procedures, the accreditation scope defines 3 main areas for the AE: the size of project/program activity that they could propose, the financing modalities that they could apply, and the ESS categorization of projects that they could implement. AEs can only submit funding proposals up to the size they have been accredited. There are 4 sizes: micro with funding up to 10 million, small with funding up to 50 million, medium with funding up to 250 million, and large with funding of 250 million and above. Suppose AEs wish to change their accreditation scope and category. In that case, they can apply to upgrade their accreditation status through the accreditation process before submitting such a funding proposal to GCF. For the financing modality, each AE is required to have a set of fiduciary principles and standards that are equivalent to the GCF fiduciary principles and standards and to apply the related principles and standards in the development and implementation of GCF-financed projects and programs. For the environment or social safeguards (ESS) risk category, AEs are also accredited for certain ESS risk categories, Category A, Category B, and Category C for activities, and Intermediation 1, 2, and 3 for intermediaries. AEs accredited to Category A or I1 can propose funding those activities with assessed environmental and social risk categories of up to Category A or I1. AEs accredited to Category B or I2 can propose activities with assessed risk categories of up to Category B or I2 only. AEs accredited to Category C or I3 can only propose funding for Category C or I3 activities. One of the most important decisions in the project's design is the definition of its scope, starting with identifying the climate change problem that needs to be addressed or solved. In some cases, a broader project scope may have multiple benefits, such as addressing barriers holistically, enhancing the sustainability of the project or program, improving the enabling environment, and/or encompassing a wider range of country and stakeholder needs. A wider scope can, however, also entail a greater degree of complexity in the project design and management, difficulties with implementation, and/or dilution of the climate impact the project or program aims to achieve. The project scoping exercise should start by identifying the climate change problem that the proposed project aims to address. This determination will form the starting point and basis for the theory of change, which articulates how the project will address the identified problem. A project may encompass many or few activities. For every activity within the project or program, the description should specify the entity responsible for implementation, detailed information about the activity, and, where relevant, the intended beneficiaries and any criteria for their eligibility. When developing a funding proposal, the AE must have, in collaboration with the relevant country authorities, a multi-stakeholder engagement process consistent with any national regulations and processes for such engagement, including confirmation of appropriate action to address any feedback received. A detailed consultation process should be well thought out and established at the early stages of the appraisal process. It should involve direct beneficiaries and other relevant players such as local government units, civil society organizations, the private sector, and academia. An annex that details how those inputs have been captured and featured to the extent possible in the design of the project or program should be included as Annex 7 to the funding proposal. The ESS-related consultation and related reports should provide details of how men and women representatives and Indigenous peoples groups, in locations where they exist, have meaningfully participated in the discussions. All funding proposals submitted to GCF must be accompanied by a no objection letter, NOL, from the NDA or focal point. An NOL is one of the key tools to ensure country ownership. For a multi-country program, no activities or investments can be undertaken in a country without obtaining an NOL from the NDA or focal point of the host country. By issuing an NOL, the NDAs or focal points ensure that the proposed project/program is consistent with country-driven approaches and national climate strategies and plans and signal their support for funding proposals. Each country will decide on its own nationally appropriate process for ascertaining no objection to funding proposals according to its capacities and existing processes and institutions. The NDAs or focal points must ensure the no objection procedure is transparent through established processes and procedures. For a multi-country project or program, no activities or investments under the project or program can be undertaken without obtaining an NOL. Each country where the project or program is to be implemented must issue an NOL for regional proposals. In cases of submissions of funding proposals that an NOL does not accompany, the Secretariat will inform the NDA or focal point of receiving such a funding proposal and will request the NDA or focal point to provide its no objection within 30 days after receiving this information. After 30 days, consideration of the relevant funding proposal will be suspended if an NOL has not been submitted, and the Secretariat will notify the AE of the suspension. In case of multi-country programs for which not all NOLs have been received at the time of funding proposal submission, the Secretariat will inform the NDA or focal point of countries that have not issued the NOL of the receipt of such funding proposal and will request the NDA or focal point to provide its no objection within 30 days after receiving this information. After 30 days, consideration of the relevant funding proposal will be suspended, and the Secretariat will notify the AE of the suspension. At this stage, AEs may reassess the program scope and revise the funding proposal to include only countries for which NOLs have been received. An executing entity, EE, is any entity, including a developing country party to the convention, responsible for utilizing GCF funds for a funded activity or executing, carrying out, or implementing a funded activity or its parts. An AE can also serve as an EE. An EE must be legally recognized, capable of entering contracts, and vetted by the relevant AE for adequate financial management and project implementation skills. It must also be able to comply with the AE's policies and contractual requirements. An EE is distinct from a procured party or contractor, which merely supplies goods or services under a procurement contract. Unlike a contractor, an EE has broader responsibilities, including decision-making, managing the implementation of a GCF-funded activity, and overseeing reporting, monitoring, and supervision tasks related to GCF proceeds. GCF does not enter into a direct contractual relationship with an EE, that is the responsibility of the AE. Also, GCF does not prescribe the form of the subsidiary agreements. As per the governing instrument, GCF provides financing through grants and concessional lending, as well as through other modalities, instruments, or facilities as may be approved by the board. Financing will be tailored to cover the identifiable additional costs of the investment necessary to make the project viable. The GCF will seek to catalyze additional public and private finance through its activities at the national and international levels. Further, GCF will employ results-based financing approaches, particularly for incentivizing mitigation actions, payment for verified results, where appropriate. GCF could use the following types of financial instruments for the financing of both public and private sector projects: grants, with or without repayment contingency; concessional loans with low interest rates; equity; guarantees. When developing a funding proposal, AEs need to elaborate on the following elements to determine the financial structure: the total cost of the project or program, the requested amount of GCF funding, the choice of financial instruments such as grants, loans, guarantees, and equity, the level of concessionality that GCF and the AE should use to finance their portion of the costs. GCF applies its financial terms and conditions differently for public and private sector projects or programs as follows. The terms and conditions for private sector projects, whether for grant or non-grant instruments, are considered on a case-by-case basis, and the terms and conditions for public sector projects using grants and loans are determined based on specific rules that guide GCF and AEs. More information on the different financial instruments and structures can be found in the GCF Program Manual in the Additional Resource section of this module. Here is the current GCF funding proposal template. Please check the GCF website for the latest template. In Section A, you will need to fill in the project or program summary followed by result areas and provide information for all the fields indicated in the template. You will continue to fill out all the fields in Section A. Please click on the link provided in the form for more information. For Section B1, Context and Baseline, you need to outline the climate challenges, GHG emission profiles, and the mitigation and adaptation that need to be targeted by the intervention. Please confirm how the project aligns with and supports the country's climate commitments, including its INDC/NDC and other climate action plans like NAMAs and NAPs. Detail the specific national priorities the project aims to address. Identify and explain the primary underlying issues and obstacles: social, gender, economic, regulatory, technological, financial, ecological, and institutional factors. For private sector initiatives, detail the distinctive features and market dynamics of the sector where the project will be implemented. For Section B2, Project or Program Description, this is where you detail the main components and activities planned to overcome identified barriers and achieve desired outcomes. You need to explain how the project's theory of change promotes a transition towards lower emissions and increased climate resilience, aligning with the fund's targets. Please ensure the project's activities comply with the country's existing regulatory and legal frameworks. Please clarify the strengths of the AE in carrying out the project, the execution arrangements with partners, and the roles of implementing entities in this section. Summarize the principal financial and operational risks and the mitigation strategies at this point in the planning. For Section B3, Expected Project Results aligned with the GCF criteria. This is where you outline the projected impacts in line with GCF criteria, including potential effects, paradigm advancement, sustainability, recipient needs, national stakeholder engagement, and cost effectiveness. For Section B4, Engagement among the country's NDA, AE, and other relevant stakeholders. This is where you detail the collaboration between the NDA, AE, and other key country stakeholders and outline the planned continued engagement as the project concept evolves into a funding proposal. If there are any co-benefits, please identify them here in Section B2B. You will provide a project or program description in B3 and detail the implementation arrangements under Section B4. For Section B5, you will explain why the project or program requires GCF funding to address mitigation or adaptation measures. Under Section B6, you will explain how the project or program will successfully exit once implementation is completed. This includes discussing how results and benefits will continue beyond the project period and how the contribution to the paradigm shift will be maintained. Under Section C, Financing Information, you will need to provide information on the types of requested GCF funding, such as a loan, grants, or reimbursable grants, along with information on other financing arrangements and contributions. You will also need to provide information on your project's capacity building and technology transfer components. For Section C2, you will need to estimate the total cost per component and output as outlined in Section B3 above and disaggregate by source of financing. In Section C3, meanwhile, you will need to indicate if your project or program will fund capacity building activities and technology development or transfer. Section D focuses on comparing the expected performance against investment criteria. Here, you will need to provide information on the impact potential, paradigm shift potential, linkage with sustainable development, recipients' needs, country ownership, and the efficiency and effectiveness of your project. For Section D3, you will need to describe the project or program's wider benefits and priorities in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals. Under Section D4, make sure to describe the scale and intensity of the country and beneficiary groups and elaborate on how the project or program addresses the issue. For Section D5, you must describe how the beneficiary country takes ownership of and implements the funded project or program. Section D6 focuses on describing how the financial structure is adequate and reasonable to achieve the proposal's objectives. This includes addressing existing bottlenecks and barriers and providing the minimum concessionality to ensure the project is viable without crowding out private and other public investments. Under Section E is the logical framework. This section refers to the project/program's logical framework following the GCF's Integrated Results Management Framework to which the project/program contributes as a whole, including concerning any co-financing. For Section E4, you must select at least 2 relevant IRMF core indicators to monitor and elaborate the baseline context and project or program's targeted outcome against the respective indicators. For Section E5, you will need to list the project or program-specific performance indicators not covered in Sections E1 to E4. For Section E6, you must list project or program activities and deliverables. For Section E7, you will need to describe the monitoring, reporting, and evaluation arrangements of the project. Under Section F, Risk Assessment and Management. This is where you will describe financial, technical, operational, macroeconomic or political, money laundering/terrorist financing, sanctions, prohibited practices, and other risks that might prevent the project/program objectives from being achieved. Also, you will describe the proposed risk mitigation measures. Insert additional rows if necessary. Under Section G. This is where you will need to detail the proposal's environmental and social risk classification, including the reasoning behind it, and outline the relevant management tools used. Summarize these tools' key findings and describe the measures to handle risks and impacts, following GCF's ESS standards, at all project stages. For investments through financial intermediaries, explain the executing entity's due diligence, oversight, and capacity to execute ESMP and ESMF, along with compliance monitoring and reporting procedures. Include details about the grievance redress mechanism, stakeholder consultations, ongoing stakeholder engagement, and the disclosure of safeguard reports per GCF policies. Section G2 is where you provide the gender assessment and action plan. For Section G3, you will need to describe the project's financial management, including the financial monitoring system, financial accounting, auditing, and disbursement structure and methods. Also, address potential impacts on Indigenous communities, ensuring an Indigenous Peoples Plan is in place and that consultations are conducted for their free, prior, and informed consent, as per GCF's Indigenous Peoples Policy. After an AE or DE has submitted the project proposal, which can be at any time throughout the year or in response to a call for proposals from GCF. GCF Secretariat will only consider funding proposals submitted with a formal letter of no objection in accordance with GCF's initial no objection procedure to ensure country ownership. The review of funding proposal submissions to GCF is moving from a batch to a rolling basis. As a result, there will no longer be submission deadlines for proposals before board meetings. Instead, deadlines will be published for the dates by which projects need to be ready for key processes shortly before board meetings, such as the last submission date for the independent TAP review. As part of the rolling review process, projects will be sent to the Technical Advisory Panel or TAP as and when they are ready without targeting a particular board meeting. The GCF board meets approximately 3 times a year to approve funding proposals. The dates of its meetings are tentatively fixed at the beginning of each year. Therefore, AE should plan for the time required to undertake the funding proposal assessment if the AE intends to present the project at a specific board meeting. For a funding proposal to be considered at a specific board meeting, the completed funding proposal and the necessary annexes should be submitted to the Secretariat at least 190 days before the board meeting. This will give the Secretariat sufficient time to complete its review and independent appraisal and ensure that the proposal is ready for submission to TAP. The diagram here shows the indicative timeline for the review of funding proposals. This is the end of Module 4. Once you are ready to take the quiz, please go to the quiz section to complete this module.